let's begin with the first question, which is kind of fundamental. The national debt is already near an all-time high relative to the size of the economy and is projected to nearly double over the next 30 years. So the question is, do you think this is a problem? And if so, what is your plan to put the budget on a more sustainable trajectory? Tori, what do you think? What?
I think this should probably be the number one question that any voter, I mean, New Hampshire voters are very lucky. They get this great exposure to presidential candidates, and they have this unique position and unique responsibility in our political cycle. So I think that New Hampshire voters in particular, this is probably one of the first questions they should be asking any candidate is, what is your plan to reduce our debt, or to at least stabilize our debt? According to the Congressional Budget Office, our national debt is projected to be about 118% of GDP by 2033. So that's in about 10 years, which let's just say that's record levels. Okay. But even if current laws remain unchanged, so if we sent Congress home and they did absolutely nothing, the debt's going to continue to grow and will eventually exceed 180% of GDP by 2053. So it's basically doubling in 30 years. So yeah, I think it's very important that voters should ask this question of our politicians. I know a lot of voters, they sort of sit and scratch their heads and say, why should we be concerned about the size of our debt? How does it affect me? And here are a couple of reasons why. When we have a big debt, we have to finance that debt with net interest payments, and net interest is the fastest growing category of spending in the federal budget. Net interest payments, that's money that we can't spend on new roads and new bridges. It's money that we can't spend on broadband development elsewhere, or improving access to prescription medicines or better healthcare. Also, when our debt gets so big, it inhibits our ability to respond to the next fiscal crisis. There might be another pandemic sitting around the corner. There could be another recession. There could be another natural disaster. And God forbid, there could be another war that, directly involves the United States rather than one that indirectly involves the United States. So I just think that, yeah, this is absolutely, the number one question that voters need to ask lawmakers is our national debt a problem? And if so, what is your plan to get it under control? And if they say, I'm not going to worry about it, or if they, don't give you any specifics, then I think that's a reason to be concerned.
Yeah, Steve, it has longer term economic effects as well. I mean, you get into the generational aspects of just letting the debt run on autopilot like it is.
Yeah, so I actually wrote a paper last year looking at the intergenerational burden of the national debt. And, the traditional sort of economic argument is that when people buy government bonds as an investment, they're not buying corporate stocks and bonds as an investment. And so you essentially have this phenomenon that's referred to as crowding out, where, investors are holding government debt as opposed to private debt. Well, in the private sector, the debt, whether it be, securities debt, equity, that goes to finance buildings and factories and computers and equipment, and that helps the economy grow. And so the more debt held by the public, the less the less investment is made in the private sector. That's often referred to as crowding out. And, and to put some numbers on that, my research indicated that, every time you increase the debt held by the public by 10 percentage points of GDP, that reduces lifetime consumption of future generations by 1%. Well, to put that into numbers, that's about $18,000 over a lifetime. Well, the level of debt we're talking about is not 10% of GDP, but 100% of GDP. And, that's going to crowd out 10% of lifetime income, which is $180,000. So, on a sort of comparative basis, future generations will be worse off because their lifetime consumption would have been reduced by $180,000 because the debt were the debt to actually rise, the publicly held debt were to rise to 100% of GDP. Now, currently, we're at that level, but that's not all held by the public. Part of that's held by the Federal Reserve, part of it's held by foreign investors. And so each of those have a different effect in terms of balance of trade, in terms of inflation and monetary policy. But the portion that really matters, the debt held by the public, in terms of investment, there is a significant crowding out effect, and future generations are going to pay the price for that.